Alrighty, greetings ladies and gentlemen, my name is Renegade Operative, and today I will be doing a little something different. Today is all about Dino Crisis, the prolific series focused on horror, dinosaurs, suspense, and that red-headed Regina going through multiple save doors and being very thick in the process. Today, we are doing a dual topic discussion. We are focusing on the first part, which is obviously we're going to cover some cuts and some alterations that were given in Dino Crisis 2. There was a scrapbook that was discovered by Jawmuncher. He's a relevant reset era Dino Crisis fiend, and then they were translated by Miss Snugglebutt. So I'm gonna give all credit and put this scrapbook discovery in the description so you can read it on this site for yourself. It's on Project Umbrella. They get all the props for this. Once again, I'm just reading off some of the interesting cuts that they implemented in the game. I played Dino Crisis 2 long before, so this is gonna be interesting for me to dissect. The second part of this video will be covered on the Exoprimal drama. Now, yes, there has been a lot of debate, there has been a lot of opinions on Capcom doing a new IP based around dinosaurs and not doing Dino Crisis itself. I don't know the reasoning. That's why this is going to be like a two-part video focused on two completely different topics, but I hope they culminate and come together in the process and that you understand my opinion, some of my frustrations, some of my optimism about Exoprimal as I get into that second part. There will be timecodes if you want to look at each particular part, and that is the intro done. So let's get into some of these interesting cuts that I found over the course of Dino Crisis 2 history. So the scrapbook mentions one important detail when Regina is in the jungle, and I don't think this made it into the main game. Apparently, traps were going to be prominent within the game, and if you activated it or stepped on it, then the trap would give the player moderate damage. I don't know if this sort of translates and migrates over to the idea that maybe you could step on a trap and a dinosaur could also get hit by it. It's not really explained in a lot of elaborate detail, but there were like barriers and laser walls in the original Dino Crisis that would keep dinosaurs out from getting you. So I don't know if this would have worked in the same way, but there were spears, pits, falling rocks, and traps in the original scrapbook and the original idea of Dino Crisis 2. So this is talking about the underwater segment that's in the game where Regina gets that giant hulking suit and you could do like Super Mario jumps all over the place, and it's like a slow methodical segment. In the retail game, you simply go through this area as Regina, and basically that's it. You just progress and you go through there. In the original script, the event was going to play out like very differently, to the point where even you don't fight any dinosaurs, which in my personal opinion, I'm glad that they added enemies here, because it would have been readily boring if there was no enemies to fight, if there was no underwater dino of the sort. So you go through this area and there's completely no enemies, and then there's like more communication between Regina and Dylan. And then they say, you know, the third reactor has been destroyed. There's an emergency power failure sequence where there's an explosion, and then the underwater facility is locked down. And they tell people, you need to evacuate, etc. I believe that maybe this would have been cool to look at. Maybe this would have been like visually stunning with the red lights going off underwater, all that different shit. And then you have to go in as Dylan to save Regina because there's no power and she's stuck. The player takes control of Dylan, and that does not happen in the retail game. He has to fight his own way to the control facility, and that's very interesting because it would have made this section even longer to activate the electricity. And I think that would have been cool. That would have been great. There's like altered dialogue between Regina and Dylan, and honestly, he comes in, helps her out. she's stuck. It sounded so meticulous to get these two characters crossing over yet again in a segment that really didn't take that long to complete in the final build. You just jump around, you get to the other side of the bridge, the water bridge, and then you go into like this room, then everything's like fucking just dry now. So it felt like it didn't last long, but I do get that they cut this down for consistency because that underwater segment is slow. It is a slow burn section of Dino Crisis 2. I felt that maybe they thought, hey, the pacing here needs to be slowed down, obviously, but not slow to the point where we have two characters roaming around in two entirely different segments. Although it could have been different. It could have been like maybe Dylan started off on dry land and then everything started to flood in. It could have worked in a way where it felt longer, it felt more dangerous to be down there with the dinosaurs that were presented as a challenge, with the elements presented as a challenge, because they had no problem putting in the poison force or any other elements in the game. So I want to make a note of two very different sequence of events. And this is when Dylan's predicament happens. You can read this yourself and see how it differs from Scrapbook to retail. There's also this section right here, which happens and plays out differently when Dylan finds the tank. You know, the tank segment where you have to use that to go against the Triceratops. I think all of this is very interesting. I think the T-Rex got killed by like the Giganosaurus, so it shows that like a lot of differing events happen between just this and the Scrapbook, and some events weren't even filled in. And then when you go back up and you scroll back up, you'll see some more ambiguity, and they remove references to the United States. Maybe they wanted to avoid some hassle, some legality. I don't know what was going on there. Clearly it made more sense though to classify Regina as a SWORD member, because that was her original group in the first initial game. I don't know where they came up with United States Secret Military Service AAA member. That just sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like some cool shit they wanted to make up to mask up SWORD. But clearly I like that they referenced the original game in the retail, so that is superior in my opinion, keeping it in line with stuff like Stars, you know what I mean, RPD. They made their own task force, and I thought that was pretty unique. I'm gonna rapid fire this part, and I'm going to mention the additional add-ons from retail and Scrapbook and the changes that they made. Right here in the Scrapbook, they had an allusion to Dylan's deceased sister. So he talks about his origin story, and he mentions how he came home, there was a sight in cold blood, and his sister was murdered. And he tells this to Regina. Then we go down the list, and we have the Gigantosaurus situation. As the fight commences, it destroys a missile and it affects the area. But what is not in the retail version once this happens is that Regina and Dylan, they go back and they enter a room. However, that being said, there's a timer that activates. There's a self-destructive timer, which is akin to most of the Capcom games during that time. If you played like Dino Crisis or RE during this time, there's always like a self-destruct sequence, and they give you like 2 hours to evacuate the island before it explodes due to the Gigantosaurus attack. There's more dialogue that is mentioned. Oh fuck, I thought I was live for a minute. Oh fuck. Hey, even in the script they mentioned fuck, so it's fine that I can say it. But there's like longer interactions here at the sluice gate, and this Cowboy David character, clearly his death is different at the sluice gate. First and foremost, in the retail game, he dies from being eaten by an Allosaurus once he pushes Dylan out of the way and they see him die. In this one, it appears that he starts swimming and then he drowns in a violent whirlwind as a Pelosaurus comes out and gumps him whole. That was different in the Scrapbook, and man, I just don't know what is even more superior. I mean, it seems like both deaths have their meaning in the story of impacting Regina and Dylan as they push on further, remembering Cowboy, remembering David, as they continue on to find out this mystery. And I guess that is it for the differing changes of Dino Crisis 2 from Scrapbook to retail. There's some stuff that I clearly forgot, but I will list some more bullet points at the end. So, at the end of the Scrapbook version, there is a line that says, "In an exploding world, 3 million years in the future, the end." This line is omitted in the retail version that only appears at the end credits during the end of the Scrapbook version when that game is over with. There's also some files that were rewritten or obviously clearly altered, maybe didn't even appear in the final game at all. So if you want to scroll down and check that out, you are able to do so right here, or go click on that link and check it out for yourself. Let's see, there's also some lingering differences between how they revealed older Dylan to be the father of Paula, and present Dylan is finding that out. Some script reads, some line changes, but clearly, like, it still happens all the same. That's the big revelation in the game. If we go up, we will see that Paula is a lot more ferocious to Regina in the Scrapbook version compared to the final game. And also, there is this whole thing with the tubes, the container tubes filled with people. They are apparently in there for a yet unspecified reason, which was not clarified in the retail game until much later. Last but not least, this was some extra information that was sort of mentioned previously, just put into wiki standards. They mentioned the Americanized setting, they mentioned the removal of stuff like NASA. They had different time periods when going into the future from the present, etc. They were dabbling with a lot of ideas, and they also originally had Dr. Kirk's daughter as one of the mute people, or one of the people that you encounter with the leather jackets and the girls that they supposedly had in the future. It wasn't going to be Paula, it was going to be Dr. Kirk's daughter, which was another bit of connective tissue for the first game. Also, Regina was going to have a boyfriend at the end of Dino Crisis 2, and I suppose they were going to settle on a more happier, less ambiguous ending as to what they previously planned. I don't know what they were going to do with that, but Alex's CGI model, which is Regina's boyfriend, was never completed for Dino Crisis 2 outside of the Scrapbook or beta concepts. There's also like differing rooms and camera angles and so much stuff that was altered in development for Dino Crisis 2. I feel as though there needs to be a capstone with this information once again in the description below, and I will introduce this portion of the wiki along with something else that was changed that will give better context to how this development was turbulent and also rushed. Due to an eternal shakeup within Capcom in 1999, Yoshiki Okamoto's Planning Room 2 was shut down and replaced by Production Studio 4 to be led by Shinji Mikami as the executive producer. If you don't know, Mikami is the guy who is the brainchild behind Dino Crisis 1 and Resident Evil, so you can see his vast importance there. This shakeup left Mikami with too much work to actively work on Dino Crisis 2, and Hiroyuki Kobayashi was instead hired as a producer. A new company set up by Okamoto, known as Flagship, had recently been acquired by Capcom, and creative control of the project was given to company head Noboru Shigemura, running against the previous game's development where Mikami and a team of planners developed both the story and script. The final shakeup was on the hiring of Shu Takumi as director. Takumi himself was briefly director on Dino Crisis 1 in 1997, while Mikami worked on Resident Evil 2, and this was his first time directing throughout. So we're going to go all the way down, and we're going to look at one of the changes that was made like with the Noah Ark's plan. One of the most significant changes later in the game is that the Noah Ark's plan reveal in the late draft, old Dylan was to reveal that the team had contracted a deadly virus and were placed under quarantine by the United States government of 2065. Ultimately, everyone died aside from the children who were placed within life support machines at the expense of their parents. In the retail version, a computer malfunction closed the time gate bound for 2055, with the project staff being mauled by escaped dinosaurs instead. There you have it. There's the information that I have covered. Clearly, there's more than meets the eye to the wiki and the scrapbook that Jawmuncher and Snugglebutt provided here, but like I said, this was an interesting like analysis of everything that went down between levels and planning and the shifting of directors who went to work on other projects and Dino Crisis itself. Now, let us move on to the Exoprimal talk, discussion, what have you. I don't know where to begin with this. I don't know where you could start. With the lingering excitement of seeing dinosaurs pour out of the sky to seeing Capcom's logo, Capcom presents, not Dino Crisis. And then we saw the redhead chick, which looks awfully like Regina after the fact. And then they have this new IP called Exoprimal, which is something like Earth Defense Force with dinosaurs. I don't know how I feel about this new IP. I'm very conflicted as to what Capcom is pulling because, as you can see on screen, I mean, her and Regina, they look fucking identical. Like, well, not necessarily all the way, but still, like, when you see that character from behind, you see her like this, like, fucking red flags go off in your mind as a Dino Crisis fan. Like, it's just, I don't know if they were trolling. It seems like it was a very blatant, elaborate troll. This could have been anything else but dinosaurs roaming around and a redhead character as one of the leads in this game. It felt like a plant. It felt like an intentional seed being grown in the ground, and this would piss people off, and it certainly did. Me personally, I was halfway disappointed, but you know what? I'm not going to say this game is trash because guess what? The game is not out. Exoprimal is not out to the retail. It is not out to the masses to play. So for all the Dino Crisis people getting super upset, super frustrated, super salty at this game, I don't think you have enough information to call this game fucking terrible because you saw a trailer and you were super disappointed by it. I'm gonna play both sides of the fence. I feel like in order to gauge what Exoprimal is, you have to wait until next year when it drops and comes out, and then we can say, okay, the game is in our hands, what now? Some are saying it's not their cup of tea. That I understand. There's plenty of games that I've avoided that weren't my cup of tea. Now, that being said, like, again, I can see one side where they're overreacting. I can see the other side where Capcom clearly put this in here and they have the capability to add in all these dinosaurs and add in this redhead character, and they could do a Dino Crisis game. As we scroll down, apparently, and I basically accumulated a lot of tweets from this, they have abandoned the Dino Crisis trademark. Could they bring it back someday? Potentially, maybe. It's not like Konami and Silent Hill where they let a fucking troll buy the website for like nearly 10 grand. That is ludicrous. And the story of that with Ito putting out that tweet saying that I never should have fucking made Pyramid Head. That was gold, but that's another story for another day. I don't know if the OP here was correct about them originally intending to use this as a Dino Crisis spin-off, but it seems like maybe either way people would have been kind of annoyed or pissed off, or maybe they would have been happy with the fact that Dino Crisis is coming back with a larger action scale if it was a spin-off. Who knows? But I think initially speaking, the first reaction was, in our call at least, when we talked about this, we were super excited, we were hype, and then they revealed that this was something else, and the hype just died completely from there. That's the risk of making an IP where it's new, but you put elements in from a previously established IP. I think someone made a perfect point. Call this something else, like, maybe not even call it something else because it is Exoprimal, but just label these things that you put in the trailer as something else. Like, maybe you don't need the red-headed protagonist that will set off flags. Maybe make her brunette or something, who knows? Blonde, whatever the fuck, right? And then no dinos, make them aliens or something. You don't want to make them, I think Earth Defense Force has bugs, so you don't want to make them that, but aliens falling out of the sky, all crazy shapes and sizes, and then you can make something from there, right? It didn't have to be correlated to this, to Dino Crisis, because that's where the anger pretty much lies. Now I'm reading some more tweets, so I'm gonna go through these really quickly, but shoutouts to Jawmuncher yet again. He said that time displaced dinosaurs wrecking a city that you have to save was an idea that was scrapped from Dino Crisis 3 pre 9/11. If you don't know the story, Dino Crisis 3 was drastically changed because of the climate back then and the terrorist attacks of 9/11. It was a very awful tragedy, and a lot of games back then conformed to changing or taking out landmarks. There were New York games like Spider-Man 2 that took out the Twin Towers, and I believe that happened for not only, I'm thinking, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, but also I think it happened for the 2004 game as well that came on the PS2. I forget, but there were a lot of games doing that stuff back then, and they scrapped it and they made an entirely new storyline set in space for Dino Crisis 3, which is what we got on the Xbox. That's even more parallels. Even more parallels is the fact that one of the signs in Exoprimal, apparently, I don't know if you can see it, but I don't want to open up all my tabs. I guess I'll zoom in here. You will see that the font is deadly similar to the font in Dino Crisis used on one of the signs in Exoprimal. Now, I can understand frustration here. I can understand frustration from the fans who wanted this to be a Dino Crisis game, but I also will not be judgmental and say Exoprimal will be a bad game. Based on that, we have to see. They shouldn't have done these plants. Apparently, Kobayashi is also lending a hand to this project, Dino Crisis producer, some parallels there. Why couldn't they make this for the fans? And then there's this last tweet where it says Capcom is making a dinosaur game that isn't Dino Crisis. I keep saying it, as long as Capcom is making Resident Evil games, a new Dino Crisis game will not exist. They are too similar, and they don't want to risk any financial earnings on a new Dino Crisis when Resident Evil, a survival horror franchise, already makes them a lot of money. I kind of agree with this. I know it hurts. It really hurts when the truth kind of sinks in a little bit, but from a business standpoint, why would I risk my already heavily financial IP to waste time and resources for a video game franchise that didn't have a sequel in a long time, and I have no idea how to present that to a new audience? There's business hurdles to be had with Dino Crisis in bringing it back. At the same time, variety is good, variety is nice, and we've seen before where Capcom made these statements saying that they were going to remake more video game franchises that weren't just Resident Evil. They said this from the horse's mouth, that they were going to give us more variety, more remakes from other video game franchises. We have not seen that yet at all. We have not seen that for Dino Crisis, and we have not seen that for anything else outside of RE, as far as I know. So it's some empty promises, is some business sense in the middle of this, and there's also that longing to bring Dino Crisis back. I think it should come back. Maybe if they did it, it could be action horror, something like intense and very fluid like RE6, but they pump in the horror elements, the horror theatrics, and that will make the game a lot more intense that way. You know, you gotta be fast-paced horror. I think that would be great for Dino Crisis. Whether they do that in the future or whether they use these assets from Exoprimal to make something of that caliber remains to be seen. I just don't know what Capcom is trying to do here anymore. You can clearly see that in the past, with the PS1 era and the PS2 era, they made new IPs, but they also kept the established IPs going. Like, there was RE, but there was other franchises like Power Stone, Dino Crisis. It was more Mega Man back then. It was honestly a lot of other stuff, Darkstalkers. I just miss the variety. Like, it seems like with RE, they're putting all their eggs in one basket for a horror franchise. I mean, Haunting Ground is another one. I played that recently. I honestly enjoy that game. That was like Clock Tower 4, but it was awesome. Like, for Capcom's sake. Clock Tower without the name, you know. I really fucking loved Haunting Ground. I just don't see why they won't buckle and make maybe some smaller scale projects in the RE engine and see how they fare. Like, not every game has to be 60 hours of content. You know, it doesn't have to be a Hollywood blockbuster, so to speak, with Hollywood blockbuster hours crammed into a 100-hour open world experience. You can make something downsized. Just try to experiment. I think that's what people want, experimentation from Capcom. And Dino Crisis is currently maybe the latest victim. I want to see Exoprimal do well. I'm going to be optimistic. I want to see how that game fares. I'm not going to be the type that says it does not interest me, because I always love fast-paced multiplayer co-op. For some, it doesn't, and that's fine. If this game does not interest you, totally skip it, avoid it, keep your money in your wallet. Money really matters to Capcom at the end of the day. So if you don't want this, vote with your wallet. If you do, go ahead. It's your money, your power, your entertainment. Anyway, this is Renegade Operative signing off. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed this discussion on the cuts in Dino Crisis 2 and the Exoprimal Dino Crisis correlation, and what has the fan base currently mad right now with Capcom like screwing over that sort of idea and not bringing it back to light, even though they have the manpower, the resources to do it. Also, one last thing I want to mention, they did say in these like business meetings, Dino Crisis has come up like once or twice, put on the table. Like, it's in the conversation each and every single time. And in that conversation, they said new IP with dinosaurs and a red-headed protagonist. Like, I can just see why some of this doesn't make sense, and I can see why some of it does on both sides. Hopefully my reasoning was interesting, and hopefully you really had fun with it. I will see you guys next time. Take care.